Welcome to the One Puff Media Podcast, brought to you by The High Index, bringing you real conversations with people shaping the future of cannabis. Join us weekly to go behind the scenes of tech and innovation powering the plant. Come roll with us.
Hey, welcome back to this episode of One Puff Media. How's everyone doing today? James, how are you, sir?
Doing great, Alex. How are you?
Doing well, thank you. We got our guest Jeremy with Open Source Horticulture with us today. Jeremy, how are you, sir?
Doing excellent. Thanks, Alex.
Yeah, absolutely. So, Jeremy, why don't we kind of open the floor and tell our guests what open source is all about, and give us your story.
Sure. So, I've been in the controlled environment agriculture space for 11 or 12 years, something like that. Started in commercial greenhouse production and designing aquaponics and hydroponic systems, and eventually made my way into cannabis in the Ohio industry. Along the way, I've met a whole lot of people and seen a whole lot of different ways to do things. Kind of learned early on. I started in with a big interest in aquaculture, raising fish. I was
Fascinating.
yeah, and I've grown from fish person to plant person over time. One quote that really stuck out to me when I was learning about aquaculture, this professor, he said, in aquaculture, there are no secrets, only egos. And for my entire career, that quote has stuck with me as being exceptionally true. And I think it's really true in horticulture and, cannabis and any crop that you're growing, that everything that we're doing, we're trying to figure it out. But at the end of the day, it's all horticulture. It's all science. It's all out there. And outside of, company financial data and, actual confidential things, I think that there's not a whole lot proprietary out there, and there are truths, if you will, that everybody can follow to be successful. And so open source horticulture is kind of taking that as, using kind of lessons learned in like real plant science and engineering and physics and chemistry and biology, and applying that to projects to make them successful, and kind of leveraging the really big and awesome and talented network of folks that are in the industry to kind of help with that. So open source horticulture is all about kind of taking a stand away from the siloed approach that we see a lot in the industry, of kind of people sticking to themselves and holding on to information tightly, and paywalls and all of this stuff, and just being more open and objective and transparent about things. My company, it was the niche I guess that we would fall into is more of like project management and working with clients to do things like, of course, new builds, but the niche that I've really fallen into is doing a lot of retrofit projects and equipment upgrades and lighting swap outs, and adding controls and automation, or swapping all of that out, or doing HVAC upgrades. And I think,
So are you guys called into companies like to come consult with them? Is that what
Yeah.
I'm understanding? Okay.
yeah, and
Awesome.
a lot of stuff is just word of mouth referrals in the little sliver of the industry that I'm in. Of, you do something good for one person, and then their friend or their colleague needs something on their facility, and it's just like that. So it really incentivizes doing good things for people.
And did that all stem from your days of Buckeye Relief, basically, and even pre that, right? As you're coming in and helping out with cultivation, and then ultimately making it up before you left, to be that VP of Ops there. Is that kind of really what helped garnish the outreach for you, where now you have people coming to you and they're like, wow, you were really successful? Because if people aren't familiar in Ohio, Buckeye Relief is a phenomenal company. They've been building a great brand there for a number of years. And that's awesome that you got to see it kind of evolve. And so I guess was that the next step for you?
Yeah, I did a lot of project management before I was with Buckeye, and so, in kind of like more traditional sectors and in manufacturing, and, with my engineering work early on, and then also, with the greenhouses that I was talking about. But so when I got to Buckeye, I didn't really know too much about the cannabis industry. Worked with a really good group to, learn more about specifically the cannabis plant and its needs. But I applied all of the unsullied traditional project management experience that I had, and it became really successful getting that project off the ground. We actually worked with so we used like pip, double stack racking, and Fluence, and at the time, it sounds crazy now because it's so ubiquitous, but at the time, pip hadn't done a big double stack horticulture project like that, and they'd done smaller ones, but we were their first like big one.
Oh,
And
that's cool. That's cool.
and so I was able to work with them to learn.
This is Pip Horticulture. Yeah, okay. I've heard of those guys.
And so, we ran into some roadblocks. We were pretty not stingy, but particular about how we wanted things. And we ended up going back and forth. It wasn't your typical project. And we learned a lot from each other and really developed a strong relationship. And, similar to a number of other vendors, the people that I worked with, like from Fluence or some of the other companies, I still work with them today, a decade later. The companies and the people with the companies, whether they're there or not. So I would say that Buckeye, was definitely like the true launching point to dive into the industry, understand the people working in it, understand some of the problems outside. But I didn't really get when you work at a single licensed facility, you're kind of, in this bubble where it's hard to, see outside. So I moved to consulting after Buckeye, and did that for about 3.5 years with a company called Bickle Consulting, who are phenomenal guys. And they were actually the consultants on the Buckeye Relief Project. That really opened my eyes to seeing, dozens and dozens and dozens of facilities across the country, and learn about what problems they have, and see kind of the remnants of projects gone bad, and be able to help and understand people's problems, and how to, I guess, better address them.
Now that you've had the opportunity to see all sorts of different facilities, grow houses, what are some of the common things that you get called in for?
So it's funny, I was just talking with somebody about this. It used to be writing competitive licensing applications, doing new builds. So like doing the conceptual design and facility planning for ground up builds. There's a lot less of that now, and it's more moved on to, what can you do operationally? There's price compression in legal states across the country, just a lot of inflated OpEx for people who, their facilities weren't set up to be super efficient from the rip, and or they were put together quickly. So it's a lot of stuff about operational help and swapping out kind of dated or obsolete equipment. A really good direct example is like, a lot of facilities have G pods, which was a super common HVAC unit used in a lot of grows during the boom in like 2015 to 2020, and they ended up going out of business. And so they're not, servicing their stuff. So companies have to either figure out how to maintain them to last, or just outright replace them. And so it's a lot of helping people update their facilities or be more efficient in their facilities, things like that.
I've seen some.
Go ahead, Alex.
Yeah, I've seen some facilities, and in the way you've described it, I've seen it firsthand in Ohio when I've toured a few facilities there just last year, and then in some other mature states where they were easily able to get money for their build, let's say 5 years ago, when money was a little bit easier to grab in the cannabis space, and they put so much money towards these automated machines, whether it's this or sorting machine that has, and I'm sure you're familiar, Jeremy, where it's like 2-tiered. You can go on top, and then you have a staff that's up on top, and there's chutes that come down. It's measuring stuff. It's usually tied into some kind of conveyor belt system, and it's really efficient if you're packaging, 100 pounds into small things, and it needs to be weighted, and it's pretty good. And I think about that, and I'm like, well, it's pretty good, but you spent, over $250,000 in this piece of equipment, and now you don't have the staff to sustain it, and you don't have the bankroll coming in to make it actually viable. And so I've seen instances where that kind of equipment is being sold off, right? So they're bringing in these consulting companies, much similar to yours, I'm guessing, where it's like, hey, listen, we need to clear some overhead. We need to streamline the efficiency of this component of our operation, and we need to get rid of some of these assets because we don't need this $500,000 remediation microwave. We're just not producing enough to leverage it. But because of the time, they raised enough money they could then just say, well, we're going to buy all this stuff because we want to be the best. We need the best. And is that kind of the stuff that you're seeing in Ohio as well, where people are just, they have the wrong equipment in place and they're just misfiring in the wrong direction?
So it's funny. I live in Ohio. I used to work in the Ohio industry, but I don't have clients in Ohio, so I only know what I hear through the grapevine, or what people are willing to share. My clients are spread out more throughout the country, but yeah, totally. What you were talking about was a multi-head weigher for
I knew you knew what it was.
What you talked about, specifically on that piece of equipment is, spending $250,000 to buy this shiny piece of automation equipment and then not basically taking care of it. Is pulling that back to cultivation. I see that 9 times out of 10 is a lot of times people will think like, okay, I just spent whatever, $4 million on the equipment for my facility. It should be plug and play, good to go. And
Wouldn't that be
it'll be like
wonderful?
that forever. But that's not the case.
Yeah.
Even if you buy a Lamborghini, that Lamborghini still needs to get its oil changed, and then if you don't, it's gonna
Yeah.
mess up the engine. And it's the same thing with the cultivation facilities. Not only, but I would say one of the big challenges is on the maintenance side of things, and knowing how to properly maintain equipment, especially the critical equipment like HVAC and water filtration and irrigation systems. It's definitely a big need, especially with the amount of high turnover that we see in the space. The group that spec'd out and designed the facility 4 years ago, the person who did that might not be there anymore. And then the next person might not even know all of the equipment that's in the facility, and let alone how to maintenance it or where the manuals are and stuff like that. So I see a big deficit, I guess, in overall facility maintenance across facilities in the country.
It seems like it's kind of like that legacy knowledge, right, is just not being transferred on. And I think it's extrapolated from just the kind of society that we've become. People don't really, I don't want to say most people don't take care of their things, but if you buy a piece of equipment, and I don't know, a toaster oven or an air fryer, right? And something goes
Gotta
wrong
have
with
those
it.
in your grow houses, right? I mean, come
You
on.
need to, but just in general, right? Most consumers, you're going to buy something, even if it's a $1,000 dryer, right? You might give it 1 or 2 times, or you'll call in a technician to fix it. But other than that, most consumers nowadays, they're just going to throw that shit out. You're going to spend another $1,000. You're going to buy it, and I think that's been
Planned
extrapolated.
obsolescence.
Yeah, absolutely. And I think that's extrapolated when you get into, because you have people, it's a company, you got investments, you got a few $1 million, you need to buy this equipment, but ultimately it's just a bunch of people. And if they have those same kind of mental kind of blocks where, hey, it's just a thing, we can replace this thing, or it's just a thing, it doesn't need to be maintained, and that's what happens. And I can imagine, especially, gosh, with some of the equipment, when you're dealing with bacteria, when you're dealing with, the proper airflow and pressure, or you're dealing with a pre-roll machine that hasn't been cleaned or refurbished properly for a year, and now you have these extrapolated issues. Well, sure shit, if a new guy comes in, he's only been there 3 months, he's just not going to use it because he's not going to clean it. He's getting paid $12 an hour, right? So he's not going to be allowed to go in there and do whatever. And so I think it's a whole societal shift, and it's insane that people are throwing around that level of money and equipment, and which is why there's a marketplace now for used facility equipment, right?
An
And
enormous
it's a
marketplace.
yeah, so it's a
no
massive
idea.
market. Oh yeah.
Didn't know that.
Mm-hmm. And it's everything too. So like if you wanted a distillate machine for your new manufacturing license you could buy that secondhand. You can buy it from a facility that's no longer leveraging it. And what's interesting is I've seen it in Ohio firsthand as well. And it's interesting it was in Ohio. I walked through this one manufacturing lab. This was about 2.5 years ago. And some of the things I saw in the facility just always blow my mind when I see a CO2 canister, one of the big ones just laying sideways down on the floor. I always question things when I see that. But that being said, when you have a small manufacturing facility and you have a kitchen and you ask point blank, well, what is your, what's your solvent process? Are you guys making distillate? Are you using some kind of solvent? Are you solventless? Are you making live rosins? Are you using CO2? Are you using butane? Are you using ethanol? Like, what are you using for your extraction process? And this small facility, they had all three. They had all three options, and only one was operational. But at the time when they started, well, we should have them all. So they got a butane extraction machine. Then they got a CO2 extraction machine. Then they went with ethanol. And it's like, well, you guys don't need all that. Like, how much you guys buying? And so they were the perfect prime example of, well, we're only going to use our butane extraction system. So what do we do now with this alcohol? That we've already bought? What do we do with this system that needs it? And what do we do with everything else? And so they too were in a boat where they were reaching out to all these other licensed operators throughout the state. And hey, do you need this? Do you want to buy this? Do you want to do this? And it's interesting to see that shift.
Yeah, totally. And also, kind of going back to the automation, automation is kind of, it's a little bit of a misnomer because it sounds like it should be, kind of set it and forget it type thing, or, once it's set up, it's going to be good forever. I see a lot of people, not just, in this space, but all over, that think, okay, well, I can totally trust this machine to do what I need to do, and never touch it again. And it gets people into a lot of trouble from a staffing and planning perspective. Somebody needs a new controls and automation system. They're comfortable, spending the CapEx on it, but then once it's installed, I always go over with people that, it's absolutely mandatory if you have a sophisticated control system to have somebody specifically dedicated to running it and managing it. And a lot of times that doesn't happen. So, going back to the car example, you see a lot of facilities that have purchased a Lamborghini, but they have a driver who doesn't know how to drive stick shift. You know what I mean?
Good analogy.
Yeah, we'll just stick with cars, throughout this whole thing.
Do you think that it's that type of issue is somewhat on the manufacturer of that equipment? I think about the infrastructure of the business they've built, and yeah, they're in manufacturing, they're producing this equipment, they have the means and the factories and everything they need, the materials to build, let's say, a distal extraction machine. But then their team is based in Georgia, and they manufacture there. So it's not like they're deploying out agents to fix stuff. Do you think it's the kind of the infancy of the industry that's extrapolating some of these issues, or I guess non-use on some of this equipment? Lack of training, lack of like care from the manufacturer. Because I know that now there's a massive pre-roll machine manufacturer in Vegas, and I toured their facility not long ago, and it was pretty cool to see how they're creating it, how they're marketing it and getting it into these grows. But they had a big team, right? So they would provide services for a region that would come out and service the machine every quarter or whatever it might be. Do you think that part of it is there these other companies that have the cool tech and they just don't have the infrastructure to support it, and the SOPs behind the maintaining of it and is just not there? Do you think that's part of it?
I don't know. I mean, I would say that across all product categories, people tend to know how to use like day to day, like a pre-roll machine or a packaging machine, or, to operate, day to day control systems. I think the nuance comes with kind of not like the core function of this stuff, but it's almost like the details, like the maintenance or troubleshooting problems as they come up. But the training from manufacturers has been pretty good. I think maybe the problem that I'm speaking to is more of sometimes more of just like a staffing and operational thing and a bandwidth thing. So, management in these companies is usually having to wear a lot of hats, especially on the cultivation side. And so, you've got employee issues, you've got on cultivation employee issues, pest issues, you've got crop scheduling, you've got maybe you're managing some construction project, maybe you have to, network with the sales team to plan demand, and you got to do all of this stuff. And so, you don't really have the time or bandwidth or anything to actually devote to really, really deeply learning pieces of equipment.
So you're really
Unless you
coming
actually,
in and
divvy out that responsibility, or in packaging and processing, like hiring somebody who's very good at automation stuff and can troubleshoot those issues, who doesn't have to worry about the production planning per se.
that makes sense. So you're really, not even segmented on one area, but your mission at Open Hort is to really go out and help these operators in more than just, a one-off instance or this or that, but it's really to ensure that their operational components are aligned for the most efficiency, right? So not even just staffing, but also how do we maximize yields? How do you ensure that your maximized square footage is done properly? So you really come in full overview and really help out in any way you can by providing, the insights that you've gained from your days as an analyst, from your days of growing with Buckeyes, and then bringing that and then further with the consulting. So it's really just a full life cycle service you guys.
Yeah, and definitely can. Serving when I was a Buckeye, like you said, I was VP of Ops, so I oversaw a lot of stuff, and it's interesting how it might seem a lot different between like cultivation, post harvest, to processing, packaging, whatever. A lot of the issues in each, although they're different, are really similar, and a lot of it comes back to stuff that's as simple as like basic human psychology of like the importance of setting goals and giving people responsibilities, and having that trust to let them hold that accountability, and to hold people accountable for things, and to recognize good performance in an actual way, and to make people feel satisfied with their work. I mean, so many operational problems can be like fixed at the root with fixing some of those like human psychological things.
So I'm
Go ahead,
assuming
James.
that you've been called in situations where an organization, a company, is looking for some proactive advice. You've probably been called into situations where things have already hit the fan, right? And now they need your help. Tell us a story about your worst experience. You don't have to name who it was, but I want to hear something that's just out of the world crazy that you had to step into and try to remediate.
Okay, yeah,
If you have one.
I can't wait.
I
Let's see. I love them, man.
Yeah, I want to hear your horror story. Absolutely.
yeah. This I'm gonna give away the ending. It didn't end super well, but it was definitely a horror story. But there was a facility, not even gonna name the state, but the client that I was working with had just purchased this facility, and I went to it was a large facility. It was like 100,000 square feet, and
Grow house, right? Okay.
they had cultivation and processing, and the previous owners had basically laid everybody off, and it was in a complete and utter like bare bones kind of thing. They only had 14 employees for their 100,000 square foot facility. I think they were only operating 3 or 4 flower rooms, and
Just by comparison, what should a 100,000 foot facility have in terms of employees, for reference?
that one, well, so the good rule of thumb is typically about an employee per 1,000 square foot, a full-time cultivation employee for 1,000 square foot of canopy. But then, org charts can vary so much, depending on what the needs are. Yeah, I mean,
They call you up. Jeremy,
probably
get
somewhere
in here. We
between
need help.
100 people, I would say. But so we had, so this, I mean, it was so sad, but there was so much potential here. And what ended up happening, put together this whole plan. They needed capital upgrades. This facility was like 7 years old at this point. They were still using like HPS lights and going through and changing the lights all the time. And so we had some capital upgrade plans to swap out their HVAC and their lighting, and they were still hand watering all of their plants in this facility. It was
Oh
just
my
like,
God, that's crazy.
Get the hose, Alex.
Yeah, like give me a can, guys. Like, holy shit.
and so, but there was a lot of potential. There was some real interest in the team. They were excited about the ownership change. And what ended up happening is, we had all those plans in place, we're ready to hit go. But then the owners at the time, they didn't want to do anything. I think that there was some issues with budgeting or something on their end, and they totally scrapped the idea for everything. And then we ended up making it work and using the equipment. We started staffing up and adding people to the team and training them on better SOPs, and they were getting their yields up and their rooms were looking great. But then what was funny is, so this was back when I was with my last company before I started Open Source. And one thing that I've really carried over from working with Bickle was, to be honest and open and tell the truth, and, always have the client's best interest in mind. Cannabis consultants have a really, really bad rap of, overselling and under delivering, or, not knowing what they're talking about. So I try to, stay in my lane and be honest. And if I don't know something, I don't know something, and not fudging numbers to get a sale or anything. And while things were going really well, another consultant came in and promised this group that, hey, we can make some small changes. We don't need to change any equipment, and we can double your yield right away. I don't use this metric, but
What a
they're like,
promise. Right.
we can get you up to 4 pounds of light, and you just have to change some little SOP tweaks.
Get one new gene, come on.
Yeah, but people love the get rich quick schemes. The reason they're so successful, because people believe what they want to believe. And so I was kicked to the curb, and what ended up happening after that is that consultant came in, and I kept in touch with the people that were working there. They did not double their yield. The ownership ghosted, the consultant ghosted, and it turned into a whole I believe they either then sold or went into receivership. It wasn't good.
What was your time investment with all that?
I was at that facility every week for every other week for maybe like 4 months, getting everything up off the ground and working with the team and training them and doing the due diligence on the equipment upgrades and all of that. And then, some time, that was like the big time. But I think that project was involved with it for about 8 months or so.
Do you feel if they would have kept you around, that would have made it a success?
I don't know. I mean, it's hard to say. It's
well, I think it went back to what you said earlier. It's the ego, right? It's the psychology component of it, and you can only do so much if people don't want to do it, right?
That's right. That's the hardest part of consulting, and I think that I've gotten pretty good at, because consulting at the end of the day is all about, it's not so much like logic and reasoning. It's more so like politics. People are subjective and emotional beings that make subjective and emotional decisions, and not so much driven by logic. Like I said, people believe what they want to believe. I'm the same way. I'm not trying to indict anybody. But so consulting truly is about disarming people's egos and being approachable and making them feel comfortable and building the trust and rapport, and basically it's sales in a way, but not selling a product. It's like convincing or inspiring somebody to do like things that are going to help their facility. If I just had a PowerPoint of, here are the things that you should do to help your facility, like nobody's going to do that. It's more of like, you got to build that rapport, disarm that ego, build the trust,
right,
and then convince somebody to make changes.
In conjunction with all of that, how much time is spent up front at a brand new client? Alex calls you tomorrow and says, hey, I need to enlist your help. Obviously the things that you just outlined are very important, but how much time, when you walk into Alex's facility tomorrow, how much time is going to be spent up front in learning their processes, learning what they have, learning where their shortfalls are, learning about things they do well? How much time is given to that up front?
Well, it really, typical consultant response, it depends. I would say, I don't, like with open source, I try not to focus on the operational side of things. I will do that, but I've really put trying to define a niche with the project management and systems integration, and kind of working more on the
technical aspects of
it. Technical, and then the nitty gritty and
Gotcha.
scheduling and coordinating and minimizing downtime. Because that's what really lights me up. And I have partners that can do like the fractional COO kind of services and do all of that. But if it is the operational side that's really needed, I would say that a lot of times, exactly like you said, the process mapping and understanding what's going on, because every facility and every company is so different in the way that they run their processes, their internal ethos. I mean, all the way down to what data they collect, how they collect it, what array of systems they're using to track their data, how they compensate people. It's all so different. So it can be a good amount of time depending on what's needed. But It's certainly a lot less on just the project management side, because that's pretty cut and dry and pretty straightforward.
Right.
Earlier when you're talking about the kind of instilling of processes to really help, and it expands everywhere, and it kind of we started focusing on people. I think it's really interesting that that's the perspective, right? Because when I think about, that, to what you said about, hey, I could just give somebody a PowerPoint and say, this is how to do it. This is the best way to do it. But then you always hit with those roadblocks of people, whether they don't follow the procedures right, they're not incentivized enough. And maybe, when you think about that psychology of giving them a task, let them complete it, build up their own trust in the process and what they're able to complete for the organization, and feel like they're part of it, in versus being, just having to carry it. And I think that speaks volume. Do you think when you go into these facilities that you're able to decipher really quick if it's a top-down ego-related issue, or if it is, you just have a bunch of, I don't want to say unsubordinate, but people who are just not falling in line with the procedures that are being outlined, and that's some of the challenges that you face? Because I often wonder, is it, the management style that's at the top of, hey, yeah, we could do this, but this is just how we do it. This is what we want to do. And these people either have to get in line or not. Do you feel those, I guess, the toil between that when you come in to try and implement? And I think back to James's question, just double down on it, was you spent 4 months with that company. If you would have stayed and further garnished that trust, would it have mattered if you couldn't have gotten the management team or that upper level team to push and promote what they're trying to implement, right? Is that part of it for you? Is the challenge that you're seeing?
Well, the problem with that instance is, as a consultant, one, you're not responsible and you don't have the power to, actually make decisions or, implement that change. That has to be on the client, not only just uh, logistical reasons, but for practical reasons too. The whole goal is to, move the ownership of these changes to the, to the client, so that so it's more sustainable. And so I'm not sure there's only so much that you know as a third party consultant, and so much that you can, contribute to. So it's really hard to say. I don't have any input on, their marketing, or how they budget for things, or their financials, or, anything like that. And like I said, it's
You've probably been in
I don't know.
situations, though, where one particular client is very stoic in terms of change, right? They've been doing things the same way for so long. But you've been in others probably where leadership, ownership, they're embracing change, right? They want to see what you have to recommend and see what you can offer to them, to help guide them to that change.
Yeah. And, I would say, and I want to preface this, because I think that this is really important when we're talking about like the egos, and some people being more willing to change and some people not. I think that this is not, I don't want to frame it as a problem of this individual, but not a problem of that individual. I don't think it's their fault. I think if somebody is not willing to change and somebody is willing to change, I kind of hold that responsibility myself. Because if, like, I'm working with a client and they're not listening to what I tell them, they don't want to do it, I think that's kind of my own failure on that sales and that trust building and that rapport, or setting it up properly, because we're all the same. Like, if you don't trust somebody enough to take their advice, then you're not going to take their advice.
You
Or if
just
you don't,
disregarded, yeah.
yeah, we're all three of us on this call, and every other human being that exists, So
100%.
it's
I'm not, guys. I'm not like,
No
just
ego
letting
here,
you two
boys.
know, I'm the only one in the world.
So this is like it's more of an understanding of just how humans operate and how they behave. So yes, that is certainly the case. There have been clients that have been super receptive to what I've proposed. There have been some that, they don't want to be told how to, run their business, and they want to do it their way. And yeah, so it is what it is, for whatever reason. I will say, even going away from the owners, one thing that I look at, and I work really hard to identify, is kind of taking a step or two down from the owners to like the executive management, mid to upper level management, call it like directors and above. I do see a personality difference across, not just talking about my clients, but talking about people in general. There have been people that I've worked with that, they might not know too much about cannabis or horticulture, any of this stuff, but they are so eager and excited and fired up. And it's like a personality characteristic where they have initiative, and it's more of that eagerness, and it really shows. They end up being way, way, way more successful over the long term than the people who kind of end up like closing themselves off and say, I have the best way to do things and I'm the best, I'm number one.
What's the drive, knowledge or money, right? And I think that really drives it, because if you're there, you're hungry about the industry, about what the potential is, about adding your value to it. You're in it for a different reason. Even ego aside, I think, it's what you probably have to deal with, but I think you're too hard on yourself earlier. It's definitely not on you, if you didn't convince him the right way to get him. I think I think about Moneyball a lot when I think about the cannabis industry. And I think about, man, you had him standing there saying, hey, look, I'm from Yale. I got this economics degree, and you're saying, this is how we need to refine the game of baseball to get more people on the bases. And that was so just unorthodox. It was so out of it. And I love that movie, by the way. But just that whole kind of mentality is the same thing that you're seeing here, right? You have people who are, hey, look, we've been doing this. We've been growing weed forever. We've been running these businesses forever. We know what we're doing. This is the way to do it, just like those recruiters were, but not really looking at the data. And so I think it's kind of interesting the way that you phrase it like that, in the different tiers of people, because ultimately, if you can get enough right-minded people behind the idea, and the goal is right to produce the best and produce the, not for let's just get as much money as possible, but it's like, how can we learn? How can we be better, 6 months from now, and always evolving, versus that, hey, we have it now, we're good, we got a license, we're going to grow what we have, and shun off these ideas. Where if it was more about, hey, I want all the knowledge versus all of the money, you would take everything that comes in, and it'd be evaluated in a meaningful way as hey, is this a pro or con to implement for my business, for my yield, for my consumers, for my square footage, for my utility bills. I think it's really interesting. Just the whole psychological component of, we have it now, what do we do with it, kind of thing.
Sure. And even if it's, whether it's knowledge or money, but I think it's all about the love for the game,
100%.
And I think it carries over from farming. Most people are farmers, whether it's local farming or big farming. It's not about the money. They do it for the love of the game, and it's hard work, and it has to be that way. Because if you don't love it, like working in cannabis, if the people who don't work in it, maybe it's hard to understand, but when you work in a facility, it's especially cultivation, it's hard work, it's manual labor, it's sweaty, it's moist, it's,
sticky, it's hot, all right. Of it.
Yeah, there's chemicals, unless you're working in a greenhouse, if you're in an indoor facility, there's no windows, it's a secure, locked down facility.
You got no phone service in there most of the time. It's brutal.
Yeah.
But I think you're right about the horticulture part, because one, I don't think enough people grow their own food. If you even have a small plot, you should be growing some kind of tomatoes. You should have some kind of understanding of how to grow your own food. I don't think, I bet more than 60% of the population couldn't grow their own food right now, which is crazy to think about. But yeah, those farmers who are out there, busting their ass, producing lettuce and producing all the things you buy in a grocery store, they love it. They love producing what they're growing, right? And I think that's, if you're coming into it for money and you just happen to be awarded a cultivation license, well, you're not going to give that same drive as somebody who has this, sweet boutique license, grow license, this curate, this caregiver license with the intent of, I'm going to grow some incredible flower to help these people produce incredible medicine and better their lives. And it's just that one kind of like little flip, hey, I got this license, I'm going to go make a shit ton of money, versus, hey, man, I got this license, I'm going to go help all these people. I'm going to produce these products that are really going to be meaningful for the people in my community. I think that it's just such a subtle, thing just to say to yourself, but it makes the vast difference of how you then approach the people and processes and the operations that you're going to build out and try and scale and sustain. It's interesting.
Yeah, for sure. And, I want the people who are really good and really eager and who love it also, be profitable and make money. We are all here to be profitable and make money and sustain but it's certainly secondary and should come as a result of that love and eagerness, I suppose.
Is it just you, or do you have a team of people that work with you?
So open source is just me.
Just you. Okay.
And it is brand new. And I just, started it a month and a half ago.
Congratulations.
It's awesome.
Love hearing that. We're entrepreneurs as well, so always enjoy hearing about other people's ideas and businesses. So congrats.
Hey, thanks.
Yeah.
How do you, I guess, when you're going in and you're talking to these folks, how do you kind of bridge that gap of the importance of building out your facility with scale without sacrificing on the quality, right? Hey, you need more stuff, obviously, but how do you kind of promote that ideology without, sacrificing on the quality and going down some of the wrong paths that others have done?
So it's really tough, and I think it depends a lot on the scale, and it goes the other way too. I think early on in the industry, a lot of this has been weeded out, but because there wasn't that much talent and the industry was growing quickly, groups were hiring people who had just been growing in their basements or having small home grows and growing this super dank weed, on a small scale, and then trying to scale that up to something large. And I kind of equate that with somebody who, just because somebody can cook a really good meal in their kitchen doesn't mean that they know how to set up or run, a commercial kitchen. It's two, completely different things. And they might know the recipe to make a duck confit and could do it, but can you make 100 of those a night? And
yeah, it's a great analogy on it. Because
yeah.
anyone can cook. Anyone can cook, but at scale, can you do it? Did you burn the toast? Did you burn the chicken because you waited too long on this? Or how dry are your vegetables because they were left in the cooker for 3 minutes too long? And cannabis is really fickle like that. I mean, if you've screwed up one light, or you didn't water, especially in an instance where you're watering by hand, Jesus, you could just screw up a lot of stuff really fast.
Yeah, well, and that's such a good point, because I think there's a lot of different ways to define quality, whether that's a consistent product every time, whether it's, really high terpenes or really high cannabinoids or really clean, vapes or whatever, beautifully trimmed flower. That's, what people want. There's a lot of ways to look at it. And I think at scale, in order to get quality, it comes down to consistency and repeatability and having an internal system that doesn't change. There's a lot of the shiny things syndrome. People want to do all these different things or change a whole bunch of variables and move things around. But I think the best growers that are out there can have, not just like one bumper crop harvest and growing like awesome genetics, but 2, 3, 4, 5, 6. Every harvest is the same level, similar things going on there. What stands in the way of a lot of that for cannabis specifically, which is different than all other crops, is the sheer overwhelming diversity and unpredictability of the genetics in the space. If I get a packet of seeds from Johnny's Seeds for beefsteak tomatoes, there's a picture of that on the front of that seed packet or on their website. When I grow that plant, unless I mess it up, it's going to be that plant. Now, I mean, a green diesel or a cheetah piss or whatever grown here is different than here, is different than here. It could be totally different cannabinoid and terpene profile.
One state to the next, it's bananas. I question all of that stuff all of the time. When I look at a strain and I look online and I'm like, that is not the same thing that this descriptor says. And I think that's part of the issue with consumers in this space as well. The lack of consistency from state to state, even when you have people bringing genetics in their brands over from the West Coast and implementing it into an East Coast market, ensuring that person is growing it the exact same way to produce that same level of result on the back end product. It all comes down to just very simple instructions, right? But if you have a different light, or you have undercarriage lights, or maybe you're growing in soil versus cocoa, maybe your foundation was hydro and now you're converting it to soil to accommodate this strain, I think it just extrapolates that issue of being able to reproduce. And I think you said it best, like the different genetics and the vast majority of new ones, it's so difficult. And when I think about the perfect canopy and I say, wow, this room is perfect. Look at all those plants, perfect canopy height. Everything's going across, everything's uniform. And I look at that as like, that's your general standard that you should have, right? If you're in one room with one strain and producing that. And so I think it's interesting. Do you think that when you're trying to, I guess, I don't want to say chase perfection because that's not right, chase predictability with the outcome of your products, do you think that people are too quick to change too much too fast?
Yes, 100%. People, yeah, I mean, we don't have research scientists working in these facilities that are working through the experimental method and controlling variables and stuff. It's the shiny thing syndrome and kind of just like the mental, like the overall static of
Get rich quick.
solutions of the get rich quick. And hey, if you add this light, you can get 20% more yield. Hey, if you switch our nutrients, you can get 20% more yield. Hey, add this dissolved oxygen to your water, 20% more yield. Do this crop stream, 20%, and it's always, I don't know, 20% more to your yield.
More yield, yeah. It's interesting. It's so interesting.
Yeah, and everybody says that, and so these growers who most of which are rather new to the industry, certainly under 5 years, they're like, oh, well, I can look good if I add this, or oh, I saw this method on Instagram, and so I'm going to try this, and this person on TikTok is doing this, and it's just so much static
overload. Overload.
It's a perfect example of the shiny thing syndrome. So 100%, and
we know about that.
I love shiny things.
And so the best growers that I've met are the ones who, they either come with a plan or they stick to a plan and then kind of slowly and incrementally change things over time. And
I know that when
really build that consistency.
Yeah, and it makes sense. I know when I think about the people who are doing it the best, the people who are actually producing, that 2 to 3 pounds per light and able to do that, that didn't happen because somebody sold them this good light, right? It didn't happen because I switched from soil to cocoa, or it didn't happen because I went from using Mills to Athena, or whatever it might be. Whatever that one change was, that was not the sauce. Now, one could argue that it was 100% genetic based, that you just had terrible genetics and you couldn't do it, but you don't. I feel like the stress of being successful fast and in wanting to be aggressive in producing, that most people just aren't taking the time to really understand what occurred before they change something. And I remember when I first tried to grow the biggest plant I've ever grown and stretch it out to see, what's going to happen when we veg this plant out for 9 months? What's going to happen? How much are we going to be able to produce? Like, what's going to be the yield? What's not? How much longer are we going to have to put it in flower? How long are we going to have to, and prevent, bud rot and do all this stuff in these instances? And again, it was just an experiment on myself. But if I would have the second time been like, oh, this didn't work, I need new lights, new soils, new environment because it's all screwed up, versus looking at, well, maybe that one instance, for that one plant, the pH wasn't right, or maybe the level of newts for the size of the plant that's being grown in that particular genetic, maybe it wasn't getting enough. Like maybe it wasn't getting enough nitrogen, or maybe whatever it might be. And I think about that stuff all the time when people are so quick to come in and be like, let's just replace everything. So I can see why what you're doing is super valuable. One, because of the mindset you have and we've talked to a bunch of consultants, and I've met a bunch of consultants both on the cultivation side, the manufacturing, even dispensary cultivation, or dispensary, consultants that come in and try and help with SOPs. But it seems like you're a little bit more grounded than a lot of the other consultants that I've met as far as where the real problems lie. I mean, anyone can put together an SOP, right? Anybody can put together, this is what made us successful. But it seems like you're taking it a little step further. You're going in hands-on. You're staying there as long as it takes to implement out this plan and see it through and make sure that it's successful. I think it's really awesome. And I think the industry needs more people like that, just to help elevate, because there are a lot of companies out there struggling, whether they're not producing enough, whether, they're only getting, these 3.5-foot plants and it should be 6 feet. And they just don't have, a proper recourse or an actual network to reach out. And so they're relying on, those clickbait videos of this on TikTok and stuff like you were mentioning. And it's got to be frustrating for the operator. So it's really cool, man. See you coming in the space and dominating and starting open source. I think it's cool. I like the name, by the way. It makes me think AI when I hear open source.
Yeah. Yeah. Well, and AI is coming to the space for sure.
Yeah.
More and more companies, looking into it for, more automation stuff and pest detection and plant health stuff. But it's one thing I did want to touch base on before we move on from the consistency is you have to, and talking about variables is you have to know what those variables are. And we were talking automation earlier, and one thing, in addition to like staffing it properly, validation of what the machines and computers are doing is incredibly important every single day, 7 days a week. Making sure that your fertigation is your fertigation machine, you program a 2.4 EC. Well, you need to have like a cup in the room to catch and take a sample and test that to make sure that it's 2.4 EC and whatever pH you're setting. And because the computers aren't always right and we can't trust them. And that's the only way to know, that your variables are consistent. And when they're not, and I didn't say if, I said when, it messes up, that, you can catch it quickly. And I think that, very boring, very rote, but very, very necessary type of thing is critical. And in cultivation, validating your environmentals and your irrigation and stuff post-harvest, validating that the weights are right and there aren't mistakes, validating that trimmers are, hitting some kind of quality, whatever your quality threshold is for that. Packaging, there's check weights and all kinds of other validation. So it's really about, having a good system to validate what you're doing and that the machines that you're working with are operating properly. And it's like that, the trust but verify kind of thing.
So it seems like that kind of aligns with, where you're starting now to where, you see it needing to be, in that, you're not only blending, horticulture, but you're putting in specific tech that needs to be there. And you're really hitting on the analytical component so that it's this, ecosystem of improvement that you're trying to implement. When you go into, I guess, a new facility versus an old facility, and you're kind of evaluating, and I'm sure as they reach out, they tell you what their pain points are and their problems in the initial conversations. And I guess when you see it firsthand, is that where your mind goes as far as how can I help these people? Do you immediately go to, that psychological component first to kind of understand high level, and then dive into, hey, what tech you're using? Where's the breakdown with analytics? Like, how are you defining that kind of, component on the ops? Is that how you kind of look at it from a, how can I help them kind of approach?
I don't know if you've ever watched the show Ted Lasso.
Huge
Great
fan.
show.
Yeah, you got a great stash. It's very good comparatively. I love it.
Yeah. What I'm about to say is going to make sense. And he always said to be curious, not judgmental. And I would say,
Walt Whitman. Yep.
yeah, okay, yeah. And he and that's kind of what I live by when I meet with the client and I go in, is to just ask a whole bunch of questions, try not to come in with preconceived notions, and also frankly like understanding where they're at and what the constraints are. So it's a lot of questions, and so I'm always questions first and solutions way later. I think it's foolish to think that as an outsider I'm going to come in and just have some kind of silver bullet solution right out of the rip that's going to work. I want to truly dive in and understand and be curious about the processes and tech that they're using. Maybe it's a piece of technology that I wouldn't have used, but it works for them in their specific situation. And so I don't want to fix something that's not broken. So it's very, very customized per client.
And I think it needs to be too, right? Because every facility is different. Well, even the two indoor grows next to each other could operate apples to oranges in their procedures, in their grow, in their yields, in their lights, and every aspect of the buildings could be completely different. And yet they're producing the exact same product. And I think that's really telling about our industry, because most people in the United States who are growing tomatoes or lettuce or apples or any kind of agricultural product at scale, it is the same. There's indoor, there's outdoor, but most people, there's been a recipe designed that if I want to produce 500,000 pounds of green peppers throughout this season, this is what needs to be done. And because farmers have been dialing in, like you said in the very beginning, it is a science, and producing that with the outcome of this, what we need to do. It's a big open source world about how do we get more efficient, what equipment is the best, but that really hasn't happened. And I think it's because of the fragmented components between states, between facilities. And I think it's extrapolated by the individual, government organizations that are implementing these kind of one-off compliance things. Hey, you can't use this product in this state on the plants or whatever, but then how do you replicate that same genetic strain over here if you can't grow it in the exact same manner? And so I think that's really, it's an important factor about the industry. And so I think it's cool that you're coming in with that mentality of be curious and not judgmental, because it's critical. Because what you might walk in, I think when you said, this piece of tech, I would never use it, but maybe it's working for them. Maybe it was affordable at the time. And maybe now we just need to tweak some other component of the operation to align with this piece of tech that maybe just needs to be refined in its process. When you're seeing all this stuff and you're coming in, and especially as we start talking more about the tech side of stuff, what kind of innovation are you seeing now as you're coming into these facilities that's either being obsolete or just being enhanced to a different level? Or is it kind of just using what you have to make it work? Are you seeing some like difference in equipment coming in to really help these things?
I think I try to focus on like the fundamental, like the critical building blocks, and I kind of reserve, the big shiny things. I try not to get too excited about that kind of stuff, so my response is going to be less sexy. I think that the biggest innovation and the biggest innovation opportunity comes in with regard to indoor growing is on the HVAC side of things
I had a feeling you were going to say that.
by a million miles. There are a number of different strategies to address it, and a number of companies have gotten into this space, big companies with big backings, who basically said, how hard could it be to control the environment for weed?
Oh, it's
And
insane.
famous last words. So many of those companies have gone out of business, weren't willing to invest the time into and money into the service and reliability required. But I think these big HVAC companies don't understand, it's if you have a piece of air conditioning equipment for an office building that goes down, uh, you know, either people are going to be too warm and uncomfortable, or maybe they'll have to work from home or something. It's not like probably the end of the world, and those pieces are usually like, you can fix them in a couple of days. Maybe you have to order parts, but in a cannabis facility, if you have your HVAC fail for a couple hours, you can lose an entire crop because it could, just destroy it. And
that's
if
the
you're
same
not
for the
getting,
dry room too, not even for the grow room, right? Any place that there needs to be a controlled environment, you can ruin everything in hours.
and it's like these HVAC companies don't tend to understand that like losing a room could be 6-7 figures, in an instant of revenue
The year's worth
loss,
of profitability, right?
which could affect the entire, it's hard enough for cannabis companies to be profitable with the 280E tax code and, a number of other things. And yeah, if you, have a failure on the weekend, but the HVAC company that you're working with doesn't have
Weekend
24/7
hours,
on
kind
call,
of screwed.
then you're screwed.
Yeah.
And it'd be even worse if it was on that fresh frozen freezer too. You had some kind of freon leak and your freezer stops working, and you have, a few 100 pounds of biomass stored for a fresh frozen product or a live rosin or something like that, where you can actually get a good return in those markets. I mean, you're totally screwed.
Yeah.
Let me ask you that in regards to, and I always think this is fascinating. For me, I completely understand the air systems and how important it is for contaminants coming in the room, for bacteria growth, for just overall airflow and the quality that's being produced. And people don't understand the individual nuances of having fans blowing in the room to get your shutters on the leaf so that the stalk can grow to the strength it needs. to support the yield, and all these kind of like one-off things about the plant that normally happen on their own outside in the wild when you don't have to think about it. They're outside, the wind's blowing, the plant's growing strong, it's got a good root, good stalk. But inside, that all kind of changes. And so my question kind of relates to, in places where counties are like, hey, you have to grow your weed in this county. This is your outdoor grow zone. This is where we're going to allow you to do your farming. How do those people combat, or what are the things that you see people combating when you have one grower 400 yards away from the other person? And I think about how fast that entire crop could be completely just destroyed if that other farm didn't resolve some of their pest issues or had, male genetics that were flying around. You could destroy an entire, 5-mile radius of cannabis growth if one of those people just really did not adhere to just standard quality processes. Are you seeing stuff like that? Have you heard about horror stories like that? And if so, what do
you do is a harder question, but yeah,
build a greenhouse over it.
There was a client that, was in kind of one of these compounds, and yeah, one grower got really bad powdery mildew, didn't treat it appropriately. It spread over to this other facility, and then they're kind of screwed. So I don't know. Don't do it.
Yeah, no,
I don't know.
Well, I just think how far, a male plant can affect a female plant miles away. And I think about that shit all the time. And obviously dust is flying, mites are flying, you got mold that's flying, you got mildew's flying. And then in this one place that I had toured all these facilities that were really close to one another. Excuse me. I always thought it was interesting that the amount of people that were just kind of hanging out next to them. And I'm thinking, man, your boots got to have stuff on, and you're walking in that other floor, and you just gone into that other field, and you just came into this field. Who knows what you brushed up against and brought into that field. And it extrapolates to what you were talking about with the HVAC system, because at that same location, there was a few indoor grows at the end of this road. And it literally was just one row. And as far as your eye could see was only marijuana. Miles and miles and miles of nothing of outdoor cannabis growing. And then you had a few facilities at the end of this road in this county that had a bunch of individual indoor grows and manufacturing facilities. And one of these grows that I went in had the absolute worst HVAC system. They had no controlled zones, so they were legitimately just sucking in air from outside into this room. They didn't have any, it was insane to see, because it was a decent facility. And if I had to guess, maybe 20,000, 30,000 square feet, handful of rooms and flower and veg and a mother room. And so a decent size operation, at least a couple million into it, if I had to guess offhand. But yet they're just sucking in outside air and just throwing it in this building as their ventilation. And I'm like, man, you have a bunch of plants growing outside over there from that other farm. Like, how is that going to negatively impact if you're not actually filtering through in a closed loose system and filtering properly, just sucking it in and throwing it in? I think it's bananas. But I think it goes back to what you're talking about with having the necessary SOPs in place and ensuring that you're doing things in the best manner for your products and your yields.
Yeah, it's kind of a different game, outdoor versus indoor. You have very different goals, and probably most people growing outdoor are growing for, unless you're in California, for the sun grown, you're mostly growing for biomass outside. So, it's probably not quite as important if you pollinate stuff outside. You're going to have reduced yields. But if you have some herms or some seeds, it's not like it's going to be unsellable flower or something. And you can have some bugs too if it's going to biomass. It's not a big deal.
Yeah, you're just gonna all be dead anyways, right?
Yeah, it is what it is. You're not growing for quality when you have big outdoor fields. But for an indoor facility, besides being regulated to do so in certain areas, the whole point of an indoor facility is having like perfect control over the environment. And so if you're bringing in outside air, but I've had, some facilities, forget pollen and pests and stuff like that. A lot of in agricultural facilities, they could be spraying dicamba or, glyphosate or, something.
What's dicamba? What is that?
It's an herbicide.
Oh, okay. Yeah, one you not want just spraying around in there. And I thought about that too, because across the street in that zone, they had corn or some other crop. And I'm like, man, they're spraying that shit with whatever they want. It's a way different beast. So I often wonder about that too. I saw some things in Florida like that were mind blowing at a few grows there. I'm like, how the fuck is this $200 million? I mean, the shit that you see, I think
and you got to know your area. If you're in a rural area, you better have, or an area surrounded by outdoor cannabis fields, you better have really stringent biosecurity for entering your facility, completely no outdoor air coming in. And if it is filtered, then you got to know what you're filtering for. Or if you are bringing it in, you got to filter it appropriately. But, if you're in somewhere totally isolated from agricultural stuff, and, there's not, you're surrounded by like woods or whatever, you might be able to get away with that, or use outdoor air to save on electrical costs. So it just depends.
Yeah. Well, I guess as we start wrapping this up, one question I want to ask before we start winding this down here in a few is, you have this history before you get into the cannabis space related to fish, right? Related to the aqua component. Are you seeing anything with a shift of people starting to use those fish inside of the cannabis grows? You know what I'm talking about? And so instead of using cocoa or soil, you're actually using a hydroponic system that has fish inside the tank where the roots are growing. Have you seen that
You wouldn't have, not to get into the semantics, but you would never have fish in the root zones.
Oh, okay.
Especially
See, I don't know. This I'm curious. Yeah.
But you say you want to, I could talk for another 2 hours about fish if you want. Give me
I wish we would have jumped into that part earlier.
I'm out.
But long story short, no, aquaponics is not something I think that's ever going to be commercialized for cannabis. It has been tried. There was one up in Canada that I was kind of following, but I don't think
they did it a few years ago, right? I think this is the one that I'm referring to. I saw this whole thing on it, and it was almost like the plants were growing in a fish tank, and then there were fish that were somehow being leveraged to kill off or maintain bacteria growth or something. I don't remember what it was, but I was like, yeah, it's so weird.
Yeah, you have basically an aquaculture system and then like a hydroponic system, and it's just the water from the fish goes to the plants. The plants, take out a lot of the nitrates and stuff like that. Clean it. It goes back to the fish in kind of like a recirculating system.
Interesting.
The problem is that fertilizer isn't that expensive. In a cannabis facility's budget relative to a whole bunch of other things, but it adds a ton of complexity and risk, and it takes away that kind of precision and consistency that we were just talking about. So it's more of a very cool idea, and people have tried it at scale and haven't been super successful. Not because the system doesn't work, it does, but for other reasons. And fish are just, aquaculture is just hard and it adds too much risk. So I wouldn't typically advise.
You wouldn't recommend that. Yeah, no, that makes sense. Well, Jeremy, listen, man, it's been awesome having you on. Now, before we wrap this up here 1 sec, what would you recommend to anyone getting in the space, trying to start a business in the space? What would be the thing that you would recommend? Hey, if you're going to get started, this is what you should do.
Oh, that's a big question. I would say make sure if you're starting a new facility, plan accordingly for, stocking up on and ensuring that you have financials to cover 6 months of operating expense. You have to be really well capitalized to do these facilities. They're capital intensive facilities, take a lot of money to build. And then, there's a pretty big amount of time where you have high operating costs, but literally zero revenue coming in. And so you have to, have a war chest to kind of stomach that.
That's good advice.
That's important. And then also really don't count on, hiring one person or two people to manage a new facility and then having an army of entry level labor. Spend a lot of time identifying, the different parts of an org chart and staffing and get that figured out instead of kind of playing it by the cuff, and be more proactive about staffing than reactive. It's probably a little more expensive that way in the beginning, but it leads to a way better and more sustainable output, I think, in terms of operations.
Yeah, that makes sense. I think Gary Vee said it best in one of his talks recently, where he was like, people don't fire fast enough. And he related it to be ego driven, and you hire this person, you put all this time and devotion in it. You think you have this perfect candidate. So instead of getting rid of this person because you've realized 30 days in, they are not the person that you thought was the right fit, but you don't want to get rid of that person. So you want to move them around. Hey, let's try them over here. They're super smart. Let's put them over here. But you didn't need somebody in that position originally. That's why I didn't hire for it. And so I think that's great sound advice.
Tell us. Oh, go ahead, Alex.
No, James, please.
No, I was just going to say to kind of wrap it up, just let us know how people can get a hold of you. Phone number, email.
Yeah. So my website's opensourcehorticulture.com. My email is jeremy@opensourcehorticulture.com. And I'm on, Instagram, LinkedIn. But if you want to get a hold of me, feel free to just reach out directly via email. Even if, your audience is people who are just, trying to get into cultivation or have questions or want to touch base on things. Even if you don't have direct business to do, I love helping people who want to grow in the industry and want to help us folks in the industry do better. That's what open source horticulture is all about. It's sharing information and being open and helping people.
I love that.
Well, it's been great. Thank you for your time today, Jeremy. We've really enjoyed it.
Yeah. Thank you, James. Thank you, Jeremy. It's been great. And for all of our listeners out there, thanks for tuning in. And we look forward to next week spotlighting some more innovators and more people moving the industry forward. And until then, thank you for rolling with us.